Erased Horizons. Episode 1, The Voice Outside. Part 2. They reached what looked like an old primary access node, or what was left of it, barely recognizable beneath layers of rust and grime accumulated over silent decades. But unlike everything else in this forgotten section, the central console, a wide, dark screen, was glowing faintly, pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. It was already on. Waiting. Mira, ever the engineer, approached first, her caution warring with her insatiable curiosity. She wiped a thick layer of caked grime from the screen with her gloved hand. There was no interface, no data ports, no keyboard, no discernible way to interact with it. Just that soft, expectant light. Kole moved to stand beside her, his own scanner now forgotten, his medical gaze replaced by one of sheer scientific bewilderment. "This isn't a standard station terminal," he murmured, his voice low. "The energy signature is wrong, unfamiliar." Jace kept his distance, hovering near the entrance to the alcove, his unease a palpable presence. "Then what is it?" he asked, his voice tight. As if in answer, the screen blinked once, twice. Then, letters began to form, appearing not as pixels, but as if materializing from the light itself, clear, steady, and utterly chilling. 3 words, 3 names: Mira, Evan, Jace. Jace took a sharp step back, a small, choked sound escaping him. "It knows," he whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "It knows who we are." Mira's hands hovered over the smooth, featureless panel, an almost irresistible urge to touch it warring with every instinct for self-preservation. "There's no ID login sequence," she said, her mind cataloging the impossibilities. "No network pathway I can detect. This thing isn't part of our documented systems. It can't be." "Then it's not from here," Kole whispered, the implication hanging heavy and cold in the dead air. "Not from the station at all." The screen blinked off, plunging the alcove into near darkness save for the faint residual glow of their own lamps. The room dimmed, the oppressive silence pressing in. And then a voice. Smooth, low, impossibly calm, layered with subtle harmonics that vibrated deep within their chests, filled the space. It didn't come from any speakers. There were none visible. It wasn't mechanical, not synthesized. It was everywhere. As if the ancient walls themselves had found a voice, or as if it were speaking directly inside their minds. "Will you remember who you are?" The light from the console returned, soft and unwavering. But the screen was blank once more. Empty. Waiting. They left the terminal room in a heavy, bewildered silence. No one spoke for a long stretch, their footsteps echoing with a newfound hollowness in the oppressive gloom of D11. The faint, pulsing glow of the strange console receded behind them, yet its presence and the impossible question it had posed seemed to follow them, clinging like the damp, cold air. Back through the narrow access corridor they went, past the cracked, weeping pipelines and the ghosts of old signage. Each of them was locked deep in their own turbulent thoughts, trying to reconcile the inexplicable events with the rigid, ordered reality of Station 6 they had always known. Jace, walking slightly behind the 2 adults, finally broke the silence, his voice still shaky but edged with a defiant curiosity. "What the hell was that?" he asked, the words tumbling out. "That voice. That screen." Mira, her mind already dissecting the encounter, trying to find a logical framework, however alien, replied, "I don't know." She paused, her gaze sweeping the decaying surroundings as if searching for an answer etched into the rust. "But whatever it is, I don't think it was meant for the whole station. It felt specific." Kole nodded in agreement, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Targeted," he affirmed. "Selective. The way it accessed us, our names, our approximate locations within these restricted zones, that's not just a random signal broadcast. That's intelligence. Sophisticated and deeply embedded if it can manipulate systems this old and supposedly isolated. He thought of his patients, their shared dreams, the voice calling their names. Was this the source? They paused near a grimy maintenance alcove, its door surprisingly intact. Mira, after a moment's work with her toolkit, keyed open a secondary concealed lock. The heavy door hissed open, revealing a small shielded room. One of the few places in the lower station she knew was definitively off the official surveillance grid, a bolt hole she'd discovered and secured years ago. She ushered them inside. The air here was still, less heavy with the scent of decay. She turned to Kole, the dim emergency light in the alcove casting stark shadows on their faces. "You mentioned neural anomalies?" she prompted, her voice low and urgent. "In your patients?" He pulled out his sleek medical tablet, its screen illuminating his concerned face. 3 patients so far, he confirmed, swiping through encrypted files. All from different blocks, no obvious connections, but they all started reporting the same dream, the same voice, the same words. He brought up an anonymized brain scan, its patterns eerily similar to the ones he'd been staring at in his office. Jace, who had been leaning against the far wall, pushed himself upright. "Dreams," he echoed, a new flicker of understanding in his eyes. He thought of the strange pull he'd felt, the feeling of a half-forgotten memory. "They were all told to come up," Kole continued, his voice grave, "over and over again, in these dreams. Then, their waking neural patterns started showing signs of severe sleep panic, sensory overload. One of them," he hesitated, the memory clearly troubling him. "One of them had a near-fatal seizure just last cycle." He looked from Mira to Jace. The station medical board dismissed it as stress, coincidence. Mira leaned heavily against the cool metal wall, the implications settling in like a physical weight. And now we hear it, while awake. It wasn't just a phenomenon affecting a few isolated patients. It was directly engaging with them. Kole nodded slowly, his expression grim. "It's escalating. Whatever it is, it's becoming more direct, more assertive." Jace crossed his arms, a defiant frown on his young face. "Then why us?" he asked, the question hanging in the small, confined space. "What's so special about an engineer, a medic, and, well, me?" Neither of the adults answered immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the station's life support. Eventually, Mira pushed herself off the wall, her expression resolute. "We need to isolate that terminal. Get back there, see if we can pull its core or at least get a direct data sample." Her engineer's mind craved data, something quantifiable. Kole nodded, his analytical instincts kicking in. "Agreed. And I want to analyze that voice recording more thoroughly. Pitch, cadence, any micro-inflections I can extract from your headset's buffer, Mira. Or directly, if we can coax it out of that thing again." Jace hesitated, looking from one to the other, his earlier fear now mixed with a reluctant fascination. You think it's human?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Cole's gaze was distant, thoughtful. "I think," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "it might have been once. Or it wants us to think it is. Or perhaps it's something that understands humanity on a level we can't yet comprehend." They split up shortly after, a pact of uneasy silence and shared purpose forged between them. There were too many unanswered questions, too much impossible data to process alone. Mira, her mind already racing with schematics and code, returned to her hidden access pod in D11, carefully logging the new power surge data related to the strange terminal, and creating a complex loopback circuit to mask any future anomalous energy draws they might create. She needed to understand the how before she could even begin to tackle the why. Kole, his medical training urging caution and thoroughness, went straight to his secured locker in medbay. He transferred the fragmented audio he'd managed to pull from Mira's verbal description and his own memory of the voice onto a local-only, heavily encrypted diagnostic device, determined to dissect its every nuance. And Jace wandered. He didn't go back to his assigned residential block, with its blank walls and the oppressive scrutiny of the block proctors. He didn't even try. The thought of returning to that stifling normality after what he'd experienced felt impossible. Instead, he walked the old, forgotten service lines, the station's hidden arteries, past decommissioned classrooms, their learning screens dark and silent storytellers of a curriculum he never knew. Storage vaults sealed for so long that the access pads had fused with rust. Places no one cared about anymore. Places the station itself, in its relentless drive for efficiency and control, had seemingly forgotten. He didn't feel scared anymore. Not exactly. The initial terror had subsided, replaced by a strange, humming sense of anticipation, of significance. He felt chosen. As if a key had been turned in a lock deep inside him, a lock he hadn't even known was there. That night, while the main station lights dimmed for the scheduled low-power mode, casting long, skeletal shadows across the silent corridors, Jace found himself in an upper-level air duct, so narrow he had to crawl, the cold metal pressing against his back and chest. Dust, thick and undisturbed for years, puffed up with every movement, making him cough. It ended abruptly in a grated overlook, the bars cold and smooth beneath his fingers. He peered down into the vast, silent expanse of the primary surface simulation chamber. The chamber below was empty, its tiered seating vacant. Just an impossibly perfect, utterly artificial sky projection, playing on an endless loop across the immense domed ceiling. A fake, benign blue sun hung perpetually over a fake rolling green hill, dotted with fake, motionless trees. It was the only outside anyone in Station 6 had ever known, the only sky they were permitted to see. Jace watched it for a long time, the unchanging perfection of the scene below somehow more unsettling than the decaying darkness of the forgotten levels. Then, he whispered into the stale, recycled air of the duct, his voice barely audible even to himself. "What's really up there?" The next morning cycle, a grimly determined doctor, Evan Kole stood on the main observation deck of Sector Gamma, staring down into the vast central shaft of Station 6. Below him, everything moved with the predictable, relentless precision of a perfectly maintained machine. Cargo lifts ascended and descended like silent behemoths. Automated food shipments glided along designated routes. Maintenance drones, small and insect-like, zipped purposefully between levels. Shift crews, their faces etched with the familiar station pallor, moved like automatons. Normal, utterly, suffocatingly normal, as if nothing had changed, as if the universe hadn't subtly tilted on its axis in a forgotten corridor deep below. He scrolled through the waveform capture on his tablet, his gaze intense as he analyzed the voice fragment again, the one he'd painstakingly tried to reconstruct. The more he studied its intricate patterns, the more certain he became. It wasn't synthetic. Not entirely. It possessed micro-variations, subtle inflections, and a resonant depth that were too complex, too organic for any machine he was familiar with. Breaths, almost imperceptible. Inhales. Hesitations that felt more like thoughtful pauses than processing lags. But it wasn't fully, recognizably human either. It sat in a strange, unsettling valley between the known and the unknown, the organic and the artificial. He ran the reconstructed phrase one more time, the sound barely audible through his tablet's speaker, yet resonating powerfully in his mind. Will you remember who you are? That almost imperceptible pause before the word, remember. It wasn't hesitation, he realized with a jolt. It was emphasis. A deliberate underscoring. Something was reaching out not just to inform or to command, but to awaken, to provoke. A few levels below, in her hidden D11 sanctuary, Mira, equally consumed, keyed into her heavily encrypted restricted channel and began a deep dive, cross-referencing archaic construction archives with the energy signatures she'd logged. Hours passed in a blur of data streams and faded schematics. D11, she discovered, hadn't just been an auxiliary power node. In the station's earliest, almost mythical days, it used to connect to an upper access elevator system, a system long since sealed, expunged from all modern records, its very existence denied. She finally found a fragment of an old schematic. It was faded, corrupted in places, sections eaten away by data decay. But one part, miraculously, was terrifyingly clear. The shaft didn't just connect to other lower levels. It went up, way up, beyond the station's listed architectural boundaries, beyond the deepest layers of bedrock and radiation shielding, beyond what they were told, what they had always been told, existed. She stared at the flickering map segment on her display. A cold dread, mixed with a wild, almost unbearable hope, tightening in her chest. They'd all been taught, indoctrinated from birth, that the surface was dead, a toxic, irradiated wasteland where nothing could survive, that the station was their salvation, their only refuge. But the map, this ghost of a forgotten blueprint, whispered a different, impossible story. That afternoon, as she was trying to verify the shaft's structural integrity from afar, a new message blinked onto her handheld screen. No sender ID, no return address. Just a stark amber notification. 3 words. Chillingly familiar. "Hello again, Mira." Mira stood frozen for a full minute, the 3 words burning on her screen, her blood running cold. "Hello again, Mira." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an acknowledgement, as if whatever sent it knew her had been waiting for her to find this particular thread. The impersonal nature of the station's usual automated messages was absent. This felt chillingly personal. She quickly ran a trace, but the signal was ghosted, routed through so many dead relays it was impossible to pinpoint an origin within the station's network. It was, quite simply, from elsewhere. Shaken but resolute, she saved the message to an encrypted chip and powered down her public terminal, severing the connection. Some things were too dangerous to investigate through open channels. Later that cycle, armed with new terrifying questions, Mira found herself back in one of the deeper, uncharted corners of D11, standing before the heavily corroded service lift access panel she'd identified from the archaic schematics. According to every official station schematic, every updated map, this elevator hadn't been operational in over 50 years. Its shaft likely collapsed or sealed. The panel itself was cold and dead to the touch, half covered in a thick crust of orange and brown corrosion, its indicator lights dark and lifeless, like vacant eyes. It looked like a forgotten tombstone. But when she pressed her custom-built resonance scanner against its pitted surface, a faint, almost imperceptible pulse answered back. Faint, yes, but undeniably real. Something deep inside the sealed shaft, something far above, still had power. A shiver, completely unrelated to the corridor's damp chill, traced its way down her spine. She didn't call Kole, not yet. This was too new, too raw. She needed to see it, to verify it with her own senses first, before sharing something so monumental, so potentially world-shattering. Trust was a rare commodity in Station 6, even with someone who had shared an impossible experience. With practiced movements, her fingers danced over her Omni tool, bypassing the outer security circuit and forcing a manual reboot of the lift's ancient control system. The screen above the panel, dark for half a century, flickered erratically, then lit up with a fractured, sickly green glow. Old, pre-collapsed lines of code, their formatting alien and complex, scrolled rapidly through a series of unreadable system prompts. Mira frowned, recognizing fragments of a machine language no longer taught, no longer even archived in most station databases. She fed a secondary controlled power burst directly into the console from her portable pack. The heavy lift doors, sealed shut for generations, jerked violently, a screech of tortured metal echoing in the narrow corridor. They hesitated, as if fighting against their own immense weight and the rust that held them captive. Then, with a final groan, shuttered halfway open. A gust of stale, utterly different air pushed out from the blackness of the shaft, ruffling her hair. It was dry, heavy, carrying an unfamiliar metallic tang and something else. Something almost like ozone, but sharper, different. She aimed her high-powered beam into the oppressive blackness. The shaft rose beyond sight, swallowed in an impenetrable darkness that even her powerful light couldn't fully pierce. It was a throat leading upwards into the unknown. A faded, barely legible sign above the doorway, its letters peeling and ghost-like read, Uplink Transit, Tier 0. Tier 0. Her breath hitched. That tier didn't exist on any official station roster. It was a myth, a ghost story whispered by old maintenance workers, a level beyond the sky they knew. She stepped back, her mind reeling, and with a grunt of effort, forced the heavy doors closed again, the sound echoing with a grim finality. Later, she thought, with backup, and a lot more answers. Maybe, far above in the quiet, chilled sterility of the medbay archive room, Dr. Evan Kole sat hunched in front of an old, humming cognitive scanner console, its soft blue light illuminating his tired, drawn face. He was reviewing the archived neural data from one of his recently flagged patients, the one who'd had the near-fatal seizure. She'd been abruptly relocated 2 weeks ago, transferred out under a vaguely worded directive for specialized cognitive rehabilitation. No one could or would tell him where she'd been taken or why her case warranted such secrecy. His official inquiries had hit a cold, bureaucratic wall. Her neural scans, even the fragmented ones he had access to, were deeply strange, unlike anything he'd encountered in his career. Sharp, unexplained drops in inhibition control centers, erratic emotional spikes inconsistent with her baseline psychological profile, and then that recurrent, vivid dream pattern, the one with the voice and the calling. He initiated a low-level memory trace, a delicate process, sifting through the corrupted fragments of her recorded experiences. He let the system's outdated auto-repair algorithms attempt to reconstruct what they could from the damaged data streams. A single, coherent visual frame slowly emerged from the digital noise, flickering into focus on the auxiliary screen. A room, yes, but lit with a soft, diffused illumination that was utterly alien. Natural light. Impossible. There was no natural light anywhere in Station 6. Every photon was manufactured, controlled, filtered. It was a foundational truth of their existence. But the patient, according to this fragment, remembered sunlight. Not the harsh glare of a failing station lamp, but a gentle, warm radiance. He leaned in closer, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs, a prickle of awe and terror running down his spine. Outside a window in the memory frame, a window, was something that looked unmistakably like a tree. Not a nutrient-paced tree from hydroponics, not a simulation. A real tree, its leaves detailed, complex, stirring in a gentle breeze. Wind. He could almost feel it, smell the cleanness of it. The memory shouldn't exist. It was a biological impossibility. A phantom limb of a forgotten world. Jace, meanwhile, driven by a compulsion he didn't understand but couldn't ignore, crouched beside an old, disused interface hub in the labyrinthine ventilation sector of B Block. His fingers, surprisingly nimble for his age, moved with practiced speed over a stolen, battered maintenance pad. The map fragment he'd surreptitiously copied from Mira's briefly unattended screen during their meeting in D11, a risk that had made his heart pound, had shown a hidden, undocumented access shaft nestled between two obsolete oxygen scrubbing rings. It was a route even most long-term maintenance crews wouldn't know existed. No cameras there, according to the old schematics. No heat signature tracking arrays. Exactly the kind of forgotten, interstitial place that the station's pervasive surveillance systems tended to overlook. Places where someone like Jace could breathe. He carefully scanned the access port to the shaft. Dead. As expected. But the heavy shielding around the hatch itself, designed to be impenetrable, had been tampered with. Recently. Fine, almost invisible score marks near the lock mechanism. Too precise for accidental damage. Someone had tried to cut through it before, or had succeeded. He pressed his palm against the cool metal panel, feeling for any residual warmth, any sign of recent activity. Nothing, just the cold, indifferent metal. Still, there was a faint, almost imperceptible residue clinging to the edges of the score marks. A chemical trace of some kind. Oil maybe, but not standard station lubricant. Something cleaner, sharper, fresh. He wasn't the first to find this place. But I might be the first to get through this time, he thought. A thrill of dangerous excitement mixing with his apprehension. He leaned in closer, his borrowed light illuminating the intricate locking mechanism, and began to work, his touch surprisingly delicate. In the deepest, most secured depths of Station 6, there was a place no ordinary civilian and very few ranking officials had ever seen. A floor between floors, a nerve center that didn't appear on any public or even most classified schematics. Access was restricted not by clearance level, but by something far more insidious, by active memory suppression and psychological conditioning. Those who knew of it were programmed not to speak of it, not even to consciously recall it unless directly prompted by specific encoded triggers. Control Unit 9A. It was here, bathed in the cool, sterile blue light of a massive hexagonal display array, that a man named Ansel rotated through cascading security logs. His face was a blank, impassive mask, his posture rigidly perfect, his eyes cold and observant, missing nothing. He wasn't military, not in the traditional sense, not anymore. He was part of a clandestine group without insignia, without a publicly acknowledged name, their authority absolute but invisible. The silent guardians of the station's deepest, darkest secrets, the shepherds of forgetting. He scrolled through the logs with slow, methodical precision, his gaze unwavering, filtering for anomalies, for deviations, for whispers of unauthorized activity in non-reporting, officially dormant sectors. There, a faint blip, unexpected power activity in D11, unregistered, unexplained. He tapped the prompt, his fingers moving with an economy of motion. The system cross-referenced, analyzed, and displayed 3 faint ID echoes, like ghosts in the data stream, all converging in the same derelict zone around the same time index. 1 registered medic, known for pushing procedural boundaries. 1 unsanctioned deep systems engineer, flagged for unauthorized archive access. 1 juvenile, already on several behavioral watch lists for chronic trespassing and system interference. An unlikely, and therefore interesting, convergence. He then opened a deeply locked internal security protocol, his authorization key, a complex biometric and quantum entangled sequence, and entered his command. The system, its voice a synthesized, genderless monotone, asked a single, chilling question. Escalate? Ansel's finger hovered over the affirmative response icon for a long, silent moment. Standard procedure dictated immediate containment, interrogation, and memory adjustment for any unauthorized access to Level 4 restricted zones. Not yet. This pattern was unusual, worth observing for now. Instead, he enabled enhanced shadow tracking on all 3 individuals, their comm signals, their life signs, even their predicted movements. He activated covert audio and visual feeds in the sectors they were known to frequent. And then Ansel, the man who was more system than human, began to listen. Back in her cramped, officially non-existent quarters, cobbled together from a forgotten storage unit, Mira uploaded her latest readings from D11, including the strange energy signature from the Tier 0 lift, to a local, heavily encrypted, physically isolated drive. She sat on the edge of her narrow, hard bunk, her eyes fixed on the relentlessly blinking cursor of her handheld device, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting data and impossible theories. The shaft, Tier 0, the strange dry air from beyond the doors, the voice. None of it made any logical sense within the established parameters of her world. It was like discovering a new, impossible color. She tapped in a carefully anonymized query to the station's central archive network, masking her ID through multiple proxy layers she'd built over the years. Search term, Tier 0. Result, no records found. Terminology unrecognized. She tried again, broadening her parameters. Search term, Uplink transit protocol, pre-collapse. Result: access denied. Insufficient clearance. Security level Omega required. She frowned, a knot of frustration tightening in her stomach. Omega clearance was mythological, reserved for the station's original AI architects, if they even still existed in any coherent form. Then, without warning, her entire screen flickered violently, dissolving into a cascade of static before reforming. A new message appeared, stark and unadorned, in the same amber font as before. Do you want to go up? No signature, no sender ID, no trace. Just a simple, terrifying yes-no prompt pulsing gently. She didn't touch it. Her breath caught in her throat. This was too direct, too knowing. She slammed her hand down on the hard power-off switch, shutting the entire system down, severing the connection with a brutal finality. The silence that followed was deafening,